Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann Rabke, and my husband, Carl Rabke. Embodiment Matters is an ongoing, rich conversation about what it really means to be embodied and why and how embodiment matters so much in our daily lives and in our modern world. You can find out more about our wonderful guests, about our work. You can sign up for our newsletter and find out how to become a supporting member of our podcast online at embodimentmatters.com. Hello, friends. I am so excited to share this episode with you. I had the most delightful and rich conversation with Sharon Blackie, who is an award-winning writer of several gorgeous books, including If Women Rose Rooted, The Enchanted Life, and her new one, Foxfire Wolfskin, as well as more. She's also an internationally recognized teacher, working at the interface of psychology, mythology, and ecology. She speaks a lot about native traditions of the British Isles, and I've learned so much from her personally through reading her books and taking classes with her over the years. In this great conversation, we speak about, so much rich territory, from embodiment, myth, story, dreams, enchantment, connecting with ancestry, restoring the earth as it's connected to restory-ing the earth, listening to our places and growing a real intimacy with life, following our callings. We have a great conversation about Sharon challenging her fear in general, I would say, by learning to fly a tiny plane, which is a really amazing story. The conversation to me is just so rich and wonderful, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Toward the end of our time together, I asked Sharon to tell us a story, and she reads one of my favorites from her new book, Foxfire Wolfskin. She's a wonderful storyteller, and it's so good. It just left me with goosebumps and clapping my hands to myself here. I think you'll enjoy it, and I hope you stay with the episode till the end. You can find out a lot more about Sharon and her books and her wonderful new membership program she's offering as an online course called This Mythic Life. She has many other courses too, and I quite enjoyed my time in them. Her website is sharonblackie.net. It's SharonBlackie.net. And she's just a wonderful resource, so I hope you enjoy. Thank you again to our podcast supporters who offer $2 a month to help make these offerings available. We're so grateful for you. If you want to become a supporter, you can go to embodimentmatters.com/podcast, and you'll find info on how to be one of our supporting listeners. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Ciao for now. Welcome, Sharon Blackie. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see your face again and to hear your voice. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Me too. Before I get into a question about embodiment, which is how I like to start, I would love to invite you to describe your work. Kind of like my work, it's not so easily encapsulated and it's very unique. So I'd love to invite you to speak to that a little bit.
I guess it comes out of my various trainings, and I've been a bit of a perpetual student all my life. So just when I've got one thing under control, I decide to go off and learn something else. But I guess the great loves of my life in terms of learning and practice have been psychology, which I studied from a very early age. As soon as I went to university at 18, I started practicing psychology, and I've studied everything from neuroscience to depth psychology, and also mythology, which was a great passion when I was a child, but also turned into a kind of professional pursuit and an academic interrogation of the mythology of my native Celtic and British lands. So I suppose my work, which is all about the mythic imagination, is how those two things come together also in the context of ecology. So that's an awful lot of ologies, but I suppose it's really looking at how mythology informs our approach to the world, and specifically how it enables us to ground ourselves in our places and in this very beautiful animate earth that we all belong to.
That's beautiful. So yeah, my next question, which I hinted at, was we often start these conversations with asking about embodiment and what that means and why it matters. I know you use a great word in one of your books, bodyfulness, as opposed to mindfulness, which I loved. I've used that too, and then read that and thought, oh yeah, that's great. But I just love to invite you to speak to that a little bit.
I think part of my focus on embodiment and on a very grounded approach to living and a very grounded approach to mythology and psychology is that modern psychology has trapped us in our heads, and so we're all very much focused on our internal processes and what's going on in our emotions and our childhood traumas and all of the rest of it, all of which are very important things to be aware of, but they're not everything. And I think modern psychology has a tendency to try to persuade us that they are. So to me, it's a question of saying, okay, what goes on in our heads, what goes on in our own individual psyches is all very well, but unless we treat it in the context of the psyche of the world, of the sensory, the physico-sensory world around us and our place in it and our relationship with it, and specifically our relationship with the places where our feet are actually planted, then we're not really going to get very far, and we're certainly not going to even approach coming to terms with, let alone solving the challenges that we all face today. So to me, when I talk about even the imagination, centuries of Western philosophy has disembodied the imagination so that we think the imagination is all in our heads. It isn't. Images are perceived through the senses. It's the only way we have of perceiving images. We see an image, we hear an image, we imagine in sensory form. And so the imagination ought to be embodied in sensory, and yet it hasn't been. Too many philosophers have kind of taken it away from that grounding. So I think a lot of my passion is not just about this whole world of the mythic imagination, but about bringing it back down to earth, literally.
Oh, I love that. This is exactly why I love your work so much.
Thank you.
That passion. It's just fantastic. Will you say a little bit about bodyfulness? Because I just love that so much.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that is, a lot of what we've seen over the past couple of decades around the practice of mindfulness, which of course, very few people who practice that really know what it would have been in the Buddhist tradition. But it has seemed to, and maybe it's just in my part of the world, I don't know about yours, gained this idea that, it's very much about being aware of your thought processes and being aware of your emotions and what have you, and trying to stop your thoughts running away with you. And really, again, to me, it's not about what is going on in our heads all the time. We can kind of solve that by being very much more aware of what is going on in our own body, but not only in our own body, in our body in relationship with the world. So again, I get very concerned that a lot of the teaching, not all of it, of course, but a lot of the teaching of contemporary mindfulness outside of the Eastern context is very much, again, trapping people in their heads. So, you're walking mindfully doesn't mean necessarily that you're really engaging with the world around you. It means watching what's going on in your head and in your body while you're walking mindfully. And I think that we have to bridge that perceived gap between us and the world and see ourselves as a flow. We are flowing into the world and the world is flowing into us. And one of the examples, if I may, that I use about to kind of illustrate this in my book, The Enchanted Life, is to imagine that a woman is walking through a wood that is full of bluebells. I don't know whether you've ever been in a bluebell wood, but it smells amazing. So the illustration that I use is, okay, you can look at a bluebell and see, oh, that's a bluebell, and here is me looking at a bluebell, and then there's a kind of barrier between you as the subject and the object that you're perceiving. But if you think of it, if you get out of the visual box and you think of it in terms of smell, when you are smelling bluebell, bluebell is entering into your body. You know, that scent, the molecules are entering into your body through your nasal passages. Where do you end and bluebell begin? And vice versa. So it's trying to see ourselves, not as separate or as an object or a subject walking through an objective world, but trying to see the flow between us and the world. And that is so much part of what the imagination is to me.
I love that. It's so beautiful. It's right. Just what you're saying about mindfulness and psychology trapping us in our heads. I have my own, what do I want to say? Worry or hesitancy or something about a lot of body-based work, that it similarly can trap you in yourself. Like it becomes very much about, my body, my breath, my hip, all of that. And just, I love what you're saying about it's a flow and it's relationship. And, embodiment to me is so much about just what you're describing, being connected with place and in relationship, not just through our heads. I love your book, The Enchanted Life. And I would love you to talk about enchantment a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, that has accrued this very bizarre kind of like airy fairy, kind of all sparkling and magical wands kind of connotation to it over the past few decades, as if again it's kind of magic, it's not real, it's something magical. And of course, that isn't at all what it was ever about. And it's certainly not what it is about to me. I mean, the whole word enchantment comes from the Latin encantare, which is to sing into, sing into something, not just to hold some magical idea in your head. And so to me, enchantment is very much about a very grounded, embodied way of engaging with the world. It's about that wonder that we all experience when we look up at a crow and think of it looking at us and think, okay, I know what a crow is in my mythology. What am I in the mythology of a crow? And that's very much about engaging with the other than human beings that occupy this planet with us. It's not, it's not in our heads. It's kind of like there's an actual crow and it's looking at me. So to me, enchantment is very much about that. It's about reimagining the way that we perceive the world and the others in it, and not always seeing it from our very human-centric perspectives.
I love how you, this has been in one of the classes I took with you, The Voices of the Wells, and also in The Enchanted Life, speak about what can seem crazy in modern culture about talking to a crow or a tree. And, for years I've been in that relationship, and it seems so crazy not to, not
Indeed.
To the crow.
Yeah, and of course, Indigenous cultures all around the world are doing this. My culture did this back in the past. My ancestors did this. The Celtic lands, whether it's Ireland, Wales, or the rest of pre-Roman Britain, is full of stories about shape-shifting. And this idea that, humans, gods, would just morph from animal form back to human form, back again, and no one was predominant, is a real indication to me of the respect with which they held the wisdom of animals, which is very different from the wisdom of humans. And sometimes we need to access that. So there's some wonderful old stories in the Welsh tradition. Actually, a story which is probably the oldest story of King Arthur in existence, where off they go on some adventure. I won't bore you with the details. And they have to find someone, and they run out of human steam, basically. None of the humans can tell them where this guy is. And so they go to the animals, and the animals say, well, we don't know, but if you go to the oldest animals will know. So they go, from the eagle to the salmon to the next animal, and eventually they find this person. And when human wisdom fails in our native traditions, the animal wisdom always comes up trumps. And so I think, we have this constant reminder that we all have different ways of being in the world. We all have different wisdom. And to me, growing up in a culture that, although it was a little bit suppressed, in this part of the world, it's nevertheless there. And to be able to go back there and see it really sparked my imagination and a sense that, no, I'm not crazy to talk to crows, which I do all the time. It's
Yes.
natural. It's what people always did.
Yes, I feel that. That's great. I'm just looking at, there's a whole group of starlings who just landed on the wall across from the window where I'm sitting, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the Voices of the Wells class that I took with you, and I know you've spoken to this elsewhere too, there are many people from my part of the world, North America, seeking to reconnect with ancestral roots and something in our own, indigenous history as white people, racialized as white people. And I just would love you to speak a little bit about ancestry. And also, I've loved your sort of fierce clarity and bullshit detector about a lot of the stuff that's out there about Celtic history that's not so accurate. Just anything that you say about all that.
Oh, yeah, there is more nonsense written about Celtic mythology on the web and in actual printed books, I think, than anything I have ever seen. And I'm a psychologist, and there's a lot of nonsense psychology out there, but Celtic mythology, I think, takes the biscuit. And I do find it, actually, I can laugh about it, but I do find it quite offensive because it is a kind of appropriation. My ancestors, some of these stories are still present in the land today. They're still told in Ireland. They're still told in Wales. The places are still honoured, and for people not to respect that and just to spout all kinds of nonsense is really disrespectful. But I do, on the other hand, think it's really important that people can connect back with that ancestral wisdom, because I think a lot of the problems that we have today in the West, if I can just use that very general label, is because we have no sense of belonging to anything. We think it's only the Native Americans or the Buddhists or whatever who actually have that tradition, who have a tradition where they lived once upon a time in balance and harmony with the earth and with the other than humans who inhabit it. It's not true. We had it too. It's just that we lost it more effectively than they did. And so it's really important to reclaim that, and that sense of that way of being in the world as part of our inheritance, to own it, to say, no, this was ours as well. And so we have a right, we have an ability, we have the genes, whatever it might be, to take back that way of knowing the world. But the only caveat that I would make is that, particularly from people from North America and Australia, and, curiously, about 80% of the people who do my online courses are from North America. So this is obviously a really important thing for you guys. But it is very important not to use ancestral yearnings or that longing for ancestral knowledge and connection as an alternative to actually being grounded in the place where your feet are planted. So to me, in that sense of belonging, there are two very clear threads. One is go to the ancestral wisdom, feel that it's yours, feel that you own it, that you can reclaim it, that there are certain archetypal characters, the old woman of the world, the raven goddess, whatever it might be, all of those archetypes are in you, they're in your ancestry, but you have to bring them home. And I think I've known a lot of people from that part of the world whose longing for their ancestral roots stops them connecting in that place where their feet are planted. So there are really these two things I think have to be done in parallel, because otherwise, again, if you don't bring it home to the place where you live, you're not grounded, you're not embodied, you're living in your head. It's just an ancestral head.
The ancestral head.
Yeah, I've never said that before. I quite like that.
That's great. So, you've spoken about both myth and story and also dreams. Really, you say it in such an elegant way about the dreaming earth wanting to emerge through our consciousness or through our bodies, through our lives, where we are. And I think that when I first heard that some years ago with you, it was such a beautiful shift in consciousness about, and to me it speaks to embodiment also, to be available to the dream or the stories that are trying to come through in this place where I am, or the place where the listeners are, say. And how do you think we can enhance or deepen our availability to that intelligence of the place where we are?
I think it's a big area. It's a big subject, so
Yeah.
I'll just say what comes to mind. Um, I think by understanding that the stories of our places never end. So we have a tendency to think, for example, and I know that this is a major problem in your part of the world, that the land is full of stories of Native American people,
Mm-hmm.
in their long, long, very beautiful relationship with it. And that is true. And it absolutely must be honored. And I think there has to be the grieving for what happened in those circumstances. There has to be a sense of responsibility from the colonizers who came in and tried to take that away from them. But
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, and I've spoken to a number of Native American elders about this, and they absolutely agree, the land stories don't stop with any one people. And
Mm-hmm.
so that sense of you, all of you, as people who are inhabiting that land, um, doesn't really matter for how long. I don't think the land necessarily cares how long we've been there. It just cares that we actually show up now. That all of you see that storying process as a necessary thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as a thing that must be done, because it seems to me that the land really longs to be in relationship with us. That if we're not in relationship with the land, it's dead somehow. We kind of keep it alive, and it keeps us alive. And so I think it's a responsibility that we have to be in relationship with the land, to think about the stories that we are producing in the land and the stories that it's offering us, to think about the different archetypes that are existing in the land. And if we see a spider, we don't have to appropriate Native American culture and call her grandmother Spider. We can think of what spider is to us, give her a different name when she shows up to us. So there just this idea that we are story makers.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Jung said, human beings are myth makers. We're always making myth. And by doing this, we keep the stories alive. We keep the land alive. We keep ourselves alive. And we don't detract from anybody else's stories with the land. So I think, a lot of it is just understanding that that we think that we are the ones who are growing, who are transforming, who are in the process of becoming, but so is the world around us. It has its own becoming, and we are part of it. And in order to facilitate the land's becoming, the earth's becoming, the cosmos's becoming, we have to participate in it. We have to show up, we have to create the stories, we have to be flexible, we have to constantly make and not always hark back to old stories in the past. So I don't know whether that makes sense, but to me, I think that would be the main thing that I would say, that perceptual shift to understanding that things have to grow. Every one of us has our work to do in relationship with the land to, as I always say, fall into the land's dreaming, to become part of that ongoing story of the land, so
Mm-hmm.
that we don't feel separate, so that we're participating in it, we're giving back to it as it gives to us.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I wonder if you would tell a story of your own experience of doing that. I'm thinking of the giant rock bed or some other, a way in which you're doing that, where you are listening for the dreaming earth and the stories that are coming from.
Yeah, I think I fell into this idea of how it was actually not through theory, not through my learnings and my trainings in psychology and mythology, but by inhabiting an island called the Isle of Lewis, which is in the Outer Hebrides, which is about as far west as you can go in the United Kingdom and then some.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like, we lived at the farthest western edge of this, and we could see nothing except one little island called St Kilda until we got to your part of the world. It was very remote. It was very wild. We had prevailing gales from both directions. There was hardly anybody there. The people that were there were difficult, to be honest. And I had nobody to talk to. Except my husband, who was off on his own track at that time. And so I talked to the land, just because I needed to talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went out walking every day in this crazy, wild, bleak, fierce territory, rocky, oldest rock on the planet. And I talked to the land, and I was very much aware of the old stories of the land, and particularly of one character in Gaelic mythology, Scottish and Irish, called the Cailleach, the old woman who created and shaped the land, who is kind of a geological figure. She's been there since the very beginning. And there were many stories about her in that place. And so I talked to her as well as kind of like the personification of the rock. that I was walking on. And that had a very profound effect on the way that I saw my surroundings, on the way that I envisaged myself, on the way that I respected the rock that I walked on, because I had personified it, as an old woman from my tradition. So I think that sense of engaging with the land in that very, very profound relationship way, just as I would engage with another human being, had there been one there to engage with, really shifted my whole perspective on what the land gives to us. And, I've written about this in a couple of books, in If Women Rose Rooted and The Enchanted Life, and it's a very long story, so I won't tell it here. But that relationship with that land and with that mythical figure really played out in some very interesting and significant ways in my own life. So I think if you are either desperate enough, which I was, or imaginative enough to engage with the land in that way, boy, a whole not just one door, but a whole series of doors open up to you, and you just realize that the world is so much more remarkable than we give it credit for.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Just thinking of story, and this is so beautiful, and your phrase, restoring the earth. And I know you spoke about one of the ologies, psychology, mythology, and ecology. And if you could speak about the connection between restoring and restoring the earth, or our relationship with the earth.
Yeah, I guess to me it comes down to that sense of responsibility, that you really feel a sense of responsibility, or a sense of engagement with the problems that we are facing. If you really think that you belong to it, and if you think that you are a part of its story. And so to me, all change, and clearly as a human culture, there are obviously exceptions. Most of the people listening to this podcast will be amongst them. But generally speaking, as humans, we don't see ourselves as in relationship with the earth. We see ourselves as slightly disconnected from it, even if we wish it were otherwise. And to me, the whole process of restoring, of telling stories of yourself in a landscape, of naming the places for things that happen to you there, of engaging with the rocks and talking to the rocks and what have you. This is all a way of bringing yourself into the kind of relationship, again, that you would have with another human being. And if you had a friendship, if you had a close friendship where, you spoke to each other every day and you really felt that you were being nurtured and you were nurturing in return, then you feel a bit of a sense of responsibility towards that person, and a responsibility for that person's well-being. And, a sense that if there's something you can do to help, you're going to do to help, because you love that person. And to me, that's exactly the same process that we engage in when we look at our places, when we look at the land, and when we look at the wider planet. That if we can really, really see this as a two-way relationship, and don't forget that, we have to listen as well, that the earth is talking to us, the crow is talking to us, the rock has something to tell us, then really only then, I think, do you feel a genuine sense of responsibility that comes from love rather than from duty.
Yeah.
Or, a sense that, we have to do this. It's all very difficult. We don't really want to, but we're supposed to. You actually do it out of love because you really want something to change.
It's beautiful. I'm thinking about what you said. I won't get the words exactly, about how the mythology we're living inside of influences our behavior. And I was talking with one of my dear friends who's a real activist and has been fighting hard for a particular piece of land in southern Utah that Trump has reduced the protections. It was Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. It's a gorgeous place. And so we talk about this a lot. And the mythology of your real life happens after you die, and that's heaven, and this doesn't really matter that much, how impactful that is in how we show up to the earth. And I know we both live in places that are probably predominantly Christian, and some people, hold that mythology in a way that, I saw one of the pages in The Enchanted Life this morning where you said, we're living in a time where there's no penalty for cutting down a tree. You might even have the greatest reward for, economic reward for clearing a forest. And how to be respectful, of people who have different mythologies or religions, and also call bullshit on this very harmful way that inspires people to be on the earth.
I know it's difficult, isn't it? But I mean, to me, it isn't actually difficult anymore. And maybe that's one of those funny things that happen as you get older. Things simplify, and not necessarily in a bad way. You really begin to just cut the bullshit in your own mind and just say, no, this matters, and I won't tolerate that, and this is what I will not permit to happen. And I think any religion that does not serve this planet and our physical embodiment on it is a bad thing. And I will say it as bluntly as that. Now, not all forms of Christianity have that way of looking at the world, but the ones that do, then to me, it is very simple. I have become very much more black and white. In some ways, as I got older, it's a bad thing. And I think, what interests me in the work that I'm doing now increasingly, and particularly with the membership program that I've just started, this Mythic Life, where we're looking at how to weave ourselves back into the web of life on this planet, using mythology, using philosophy, is if you go back through Western philosophy to Plato and before Plato, you see none of that. You see none of that idea that the transcendental, the afterlife, the hereafter is what matters. Absolutely none of it. The old Western philosophical traditions tell us that every individual soul chose to come to this world now, at this time, in this place, bearing a gift, in order to be something, to do something, to offer something to the world, but chose to come here and be embodied on this earth. And so the choice to be embodied, the choice to be in a physical body, is absolutely critical to the development of that soul, of us. And so, that where that all started to go wrong is a very, very complicated subject that we won't get into now, but it did start to go wrong actually with Plato later, and on into the Christian period, where it became the case increasingly that the physical world was seen as in some way inferior to the world of the intellect or the rational world. But in Western Europe, at every level, from Plato and the ancient Greeks to the Celtic mythologies to the Nordic mythologies, every way you look, if you go back to the pre-Christian era, there was a genuine sense that what happens in this body, in this place, at this time, is what it is all about. And that's true of all, traditions around the world. So yes, I think the major monotheistic religions have an awful lot to answer for in taking that away from people.
I'm thinking of, you brought a guest teacher to one of our classes who teaches and practices in the Christian tradition, which was surprising to me at the time. Is it Christian? She's in Ireland near you?
Yeah, Christine Valtis Paintner, a very good friend of mine who runs an organization called Abbey of the Arts. Yeah.
So I just want to say, in case anyone is listening and feeling offended or that we're getting anti-Christian here, we're not.
No, it very much depends on how you practice it. And Christine, as a Christian who teaches from a kind of Celtic Christian tradition, which is a whole other discussion, is very much about embodiment, very much about being here in this place. And of course, the early Celtic Christianity, and I'm oversimplifying a wee bit here, but for the sake of getting on with it, the early Celtic Christianity in places like Ireland and Wales, which was not driven by Rome, which was much less hierarchical, which came into a culture that was deeply embedded in nature, did not have this sense of the body being unimportant. Absolutely the contrary. A lot of the early Christian poetry in Wales and in Ireland is intensely about embedding yourself in nature. So in many ways, this is a later thing, or it's a Roman thing, and it isn't true that all Christians have to see the world in this way. So no, you're absolutely right to clarify that. I'm not saying that Christianity in general is a problem, but the varieties of it that have kind of like, perpetrated themselves upon the Western world in spades really is actually responsible for a lot of it. So we have to hold both of those things, together.
Thank you. I don't know why this is coming right now, but I'm curious to ask you to speak about calling and this view that we come with a calling. I think maybe it came out of you speaking about the importance of choosing to come and be embodied and being here. And I know a lot of people are struggling. The world seems really hard and really insane. And, which makes me want to ask you to speak about both the importance of calling and the importance of beauty. What would you like to say about, if people are not living in relationship with a calling,
it really, again, I mean, this is absolutely intrinsic to the old Western ways of looking at the world. And I think that's important for us all to know, that again, if you look 2,000, 3,000 years ago, this is what people believed. Literally that every soul chose to come to the place that they're in now, at the time they're in now, to the parents they were with now, for better or worse, it seems, to learn a lesson. And that this was what happened. So Plato was the one who really wrote about this first. And he had this lovely story. It's kind of a myth that he sort of made. He didn't make it up. He spoke to somebody who had had a near-death experience, a soldier who'd had a near-death experience. And he wrote this down, what this soldier told him, as a way of conveying calling. And the idea was that every soul in the other world, whatever you want to call it, decides that it's going to come to the physical world and be embodied. And it passes, every soul, before it does that, passes before the throne of the goddess Ananke. That's Ananke. And Ananke's name means in Greek necessity, and she was the mother of the three fates. And so the soul would, in collaboration with Ananke, determine what it was going to do, what it was going to be, what its purpose was, whatever you might like to look at it. And then off the soul would set. It would cross the plane of forgetfulness. It would drink of the river Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness. It would end up in the physical plane, remembering absolutely nothing about all of that, which might seem very unhelpful. But in that old philosophy, that's the point, you end up and then you grow. It's a test, it's a challenge in some ways, but it's also a gift. So yes, the idea would very much be that each soul chose to come exactly where it needed to be in order to fulfill something. And, calling, I should say, calling is not about vocation. It's a different concept from vocation. Often people conflate the two. It's not about your job. It's about a particular gift, a way of being in the world that you have. It's not to save the world, although someone like Greta Thunberg clearly has a calling that is about trying to save the world. Some people have a calling to grow a garden and make it beautiful and to save a piece of land. Some people have a calling just to be a beautiful spirit in the world so that they inspire others to beauty. So there are various ways of fulfilling your calling, but it very much is about, no, you chose to be here in these difficult times in order for something to happen. And there are, again, two threads to calling. One is your growth as a soul, that you as an individual soul need to learn some lessons, need to grow, need to transform, but also there's that sense of the gift and the responsibility to the world around you. And whenever I look around, and, we all do, and get disheartened, or more than disheartened, and see it all falling apart, I remind myself that I do not know the bigger picture. I don't even know why I'm here, but I believe I'm here for something. And so all I can do is kind of plod along, doing what I'm best at doing, fulfilling my gift in the world, making it as good as I can, and remembering that the whole point of calling is that we never know what impact we're having. we never know how many we're influencing, how many we're saving, in quotes. And so we just have to go on it, do it anyway. So to me, the beauty of this idea of calling is it it takes you away from this concept of attachment to outcome. You'll never know, but you chose to be here. So just keep on doing it and trust that, at some level it matters. And I think that old, beautiful 2,000, 3,000-year-old way of looking at the world and the various messes that we've had in it really, really, as much as anything, gives me the strength to carry on in very difficult times.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'm remembering something that you wrote in one of your newsletters recently about flying a plane, which is something you've done and learned as a pilot. And you said something that was so evocative or provocative for me when I read it, which was something about like, if you're not willing to risk dying, what can you really say about living, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love you to speak to that, both flying and risk and life and death and that whole
Oh gosh. Yeah, that would be short. Very short answer coming up. I'll keep. Yeah, it's a brilliant question. It's just, I'll try and keep it concise. So, as a child, I had a very strange upbringing and not a very easy childhood, and I had a lot of anxiety. And I ended up being a fairly careful, slightly fearful adult who was not going to take risks. It just wasn't in my nature. I wanted to be safe. I wanted more than anything else to feel safe and comfortable, which I'd never really done as a child. And it got to a stage where I went through probably 3 midlife crises in a row. Most people satisfy themselves with one, but I just went bonk, bonk, bonk. Sometime around my early through my late 30s. I ended up in America, having fled a first marriage in which I was no longer feeling safe, working for a corporation, doing a job I did not believe in. And I knew all along that was not my calling, but I didn't know how to break out of it and still be safe. And I suppose the only thing I can say is that I woke up one morning when I was about 39. I think I was about 39. And do you remember, well, of course you remember, everybody in America remembers JFK Jr.'s death in a small plane that he crashed at Martha's Vineyard. And the whole news was about, John F. Kennedy Jr. and how he may have been a good pilot, he might not have been a good pilot. And all around at work, everybody was talking about this. And it bugged me. And I woke up the next morning and I thought, I really need to learn to fly. And it was insane because JFK Jr. just died. It was insane because I had a fear of flying. So this was not an obvious thing for me to do. But it was just, I was so gripped by this sense that, no, I need to do this. And because I had this fear of flying, every time I got in that tiny Cessna 152, which is like a tin can with a spinning thing on the front of it, I thought I was going to die. And that isn't crazy. I mean, people do die, in those planes. And I looked at every crash report that I could to figure out how not to die. But ultimately, I ended up, doing the solo flight that I never thought I would possibly be able to do when I started. I ended up getting my pilot's license in the desert of New Mexico from a elderly US ex-Marine who called me little lady all the time. But he unfortunately wasn't as good as Chris Christopherson, otherwise that might have worked. but it was only really afterwards, at the time you're just in the grip of this sense of, no, I have to do this, otherwise I can't go on, I cannot. And it was a really important way of breaking out of that need to be safe in the world. And it was really only quite a long time afterwards that I understood it in that sense, that I was frightened of death. I was frightened that, I would risk death. I had to be safe. And until I every day that I flew 2-3 times a week, put myself in the hands of whatever was out there and just took off anyway, I really could not move on. I could not break out of that trap that I'd set for myself. And I couldn't leave that safe corporate existence. I couldn't go back home. I couldn't, end up in a place where I had no money, nothing very much, and just say, okay, I'm going to try practicing psychology again. I'm going to think of writing a book. I'd never have been able to do that if I had not literally stared death in the face. And I think that if we come back to calling, the whole thing to me about calling is we did not, as souls, choose to come here to be embodied in this place at this time to be safe. We didn't. We chose to come here to risk everything for the purpose of giving the gift that we have to give to the world and doing whatever we can to be in service to the world. And so to me, yes, absolutely, those things are very, very tied up now. You know, that whole sense where I saw that in the very personal level in my own life, and looking at the wider world around us, because our culture tells us we have to retire rich. You know, we have to retire with a nice pension, with a big house, to go on cruises and play golf or whatever it is. And it's just like, what is that about, really?
I love this story. And I have to tell you, well, I adore your books. That's how I found out about you and your work. And have been for the last year trying to work on my own book, and it's hard. And it's hard, the risk, you know, it's not just the writing of it, it's the, who am I to have something to say? And I just love, the way risking your life in a tiny little tin can in the air helped you have the courage. I really can relate to that. Not that I want to get in a little Cessna, but just thanks for sharing that story. It's beautiful. Speaking of your books, I have a few questions. And one is, I would love you to describe, for people who might not be familiar with your work, you can probably do it more succinctly than I can, what your books are about, because they're so unique and so different from each other. Would you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first book was a novel, and it was called The Long Delirious Burning Blue, or my husband calls it The Long Delirious Burning Title, because it does go on a bit. But that was very much a fictionalized account of my childhood, with a mother who was an alcoholic and a father who was very violent, and that whole sense of that passing down through a family, you know, and influencing you through the generations, really. And also about the fictionalized version of that process of learning to fly. And it's and in both of those cases, I wrote that novel from two perspectives, one of the daughter and one of the mother. And it's very much about, and I suppose I wasn't really thinking in this way at that time, so it's kind of funny to look back at it now, but in both cases, it's their relationship with the land and their mythical relationship with the land that kind of saves them, for want of a better word. So the daughter is flying in the deserts of Arizona. For me, it was New Mexico, but I made it Arizona in the book. And as you know, it's very much about her rising above the earth, how she finally becomes embodied and a part of the earth for the very first time. With a mother, it's very much about her relationship with a very different, misty, waterlogged lands of Scotland. So it was always about place, and I don't think I really realized it at the beginning. And then my second book was If Women Rose Rooted, and that came after a very, very difficult period of time in Lewis, and this island that I was talking about in the Outer Hebrides, which was the most transformative 4 years of my life. I mean, it stripped away everything. It was a bleak land. It was beautiful in its bleakness, but it took no prisoners. And those gales stripped away a lot of dross over those 4 years. And at the point that we left, a lot of things had fallen apart. I really felt as if the place had spat me out. And we came back to Ireland, and I was in a clatter of bits. And I wrote that book. It wasn't supposed to be that book, but I had a very understanding publisher who was all for it. And that was very much about the mythology of these lands and the ways in which women, specifically women, have power in that mythology, and how women are associated with the land, how they personify the land, how they have a sense of responsibility for the land, and how they hold people to account for their atrocities on the land, more interestingly. And I thought to myself, you know, looking at that old mythology, this is just what we need for these times. We need Western women, white women, to see that their mythology as well tells us that we have that role as guardians and protectors of the land. You know, we don't have to look to the Native Americans. We don't have to look to the East. We have our own stories that we need to reclaim, that we need to use as inspiration. So that was really very much the reason for that. And it was all about that book, and it was all about reconnecting with our places, reconnecting with the stories of our places, coming back to that sense of belonging. And then the third book, The Enchanted Life, kind of picked up from that, because a lot of people would say, well, it was a wonderful story, you know, it was very inspiring, but how do I actually do it? And so The Enchanted Life was an attempt at trying to be a little bit more practical. It's not really a how-to book, but it does have some how-to things in it, which is kind of like, okay, here's how you can connect with your places. Here's how you can restory. Here's how you can begin to look at the world very, very differently. So those, I think, were the main influences. And then my fourth book, which was just out last year, was actually going back to reimagining some old fairy tales of shape-shifting women. I'm very interested in women in our mythology. I mean, I am one, but also I think it has a lot of, it shows women with a lot more power than we all understand. You know, that's not the story we've been given in the West. We've been given a story of disempowered women. We've been given a story of evil women like Eve, you know, women who caused the problem, isn't it? It's like, no, that was not the original. That was not the original idea. So those were stories about women who took on animal form, or who took on other transformations, who shifted, who changed, who grew, who had voices, and trying to retell some of those stories, which I think, you know, have suffered under the patriarchy, to try to empower women and think about how we can reimagine our voices again. So I think, you know, when I look at it, there is a thread through all of the books, whether they're nonfiction or fiction, that I don't necessarily go into them intending to follow, but it just, you know, that's the nature of my work, I guess.
The calling, being true.
Yeah, maybe.
It's beautiful. I don't know if this puts you on the spot or if you're up for it, but you're such a wonderful storyteller. And I didn't choose one from Foxfire Wolfskin, or even you can go back to earlier books, but would you be willing to tell us a story?
Yeah. How do we have 5 minutes or so?
For sure. We have
10
if you do.
Okay, then I'm going to read you a story from Foxfire Wolfskin. How would that be? It's a very, very short one. It's the shortest one of all. It's about 5 minutes. And in If Women Rose Rooted, I wrote a lot about the Selkie, which is the old story of the seal woman, you know, who once a month on the beach under the full moon has the ability to slip off her seal skin and to take on human form. And in brief, the story is that she slips off her seal skin one night. It's stolen by a fisherman, and she is forced, effectively, the stories all vary, but effectively she's forced to marry him because he's stolen her skin. She can't take on her seal form, and she gives birth to his children, but she withers. You know, she's a seal and she can't get back to water. Eventually, one of her, normally it's her daughter, finds the skin, and off she goes, sails away off into the sunset, and that's that. And I love that story deeply. But, you know, I always felt that it was very unsatisfying, because I do really, as an older woman now, like stories with consequences. So when I came across a wonderful old Croatian story of, which is very similar to the seal story, but it was about a wolf woman, and a hunter stole her skin, I thought, I think this story actually in contemporary times would go a little bit differently. So this story is called Wolfskin. Say you go alone into the woods. It's winter and you're hungry. So you take up your rifle, put on your deerskin jacket and your boots lined with rabbit fur. Off you trot. Say it's dawn and the light in the woods is thin, air clear and snow on the ground to give the game away. Crow calling your name, ready to roost owl, hooting its warning into fire-filled sky. Fledgling morning, Orion no more than a glimmer now, hunter hanging over hunter. But say you don't think much of all that. You're there to kill your dinner, not to admire the scenery. Say you're tired. You were up late the night before. Slim pickings in the woods, and on you walk. Say you're tired as evening falls, and the rabbit is still warm. A long way back home, and the mill house, which takes you by surprise, invites you in. So you go inside to spend the night. Tomorrow there might be hind. Make a fire in the parlor, skin and cook the rabbit. You climb into the loft to sleep. Leave the fire burning in the grate, but hot air rises. Leave broth and bones in the pan for breakfast. Say you hear the door open just as you're falling asleep. Door creaks like all the best stories say. Say a wolf comes in, sniffs, smells something tasty. Say she goes to the fire, raises herself up on her hind legs, shouts, "Skin down, skin down." Sure enough, down comes her skin. Slips out of it, and out slips a woman. The mill house is her home. Hangs the skin up on a peg behind the door, goes back to the fire, gnaws bones, drinks warm broth, falls asleep on the rush mat. Say you watch this from a hole in the loft's wooden floor. Say you creep down the ladder and snatch away the wolf woman's skin. Nail it to the mill wheel, tight and true. Walk over to the fire and nudge the wolf woman with your foot. Say she screams, skin on me, skin on me. But it's the mill wheel the skin is on. The wolf woman cries. Say you laugh. Ha ha ha. You know the rest. Wolf woman has to marry man because man has her skin. Man moves into enchanted mill. Wolf woman cleans and cooks. Same old story. Say you tell her you like stories. Make her tell you stories each night before bed. Wolf stories, they make you laugh. Promise to give her skin back if she tells you a story you really like. But say you actually decide to sell the skin. It'll fetch a pretty price. Didn't even have to skin the wolf. It came ready-made for sale. Say the wolf woman sees that her skin is gone and cries. Say you laugh. Ha ha ha. Say the wolf woman begins pregnant with Hope, but ends up pregnant with a man-child. Say the man-child kills his brother Hope in the womb. Don't you like this story? Say you do. You don't seem to be laughing now. Well then, say the man-child hears people whisper that his mother is really a wolf. Mama, he says, are you a wolf? What nonsense, says the mother, and turns away. Say the man-child asks his father whether his mother is a wolf. Father says yes. Man-child asks father where his mother's skin is. Father says he sold it. Say the man-child starts to wonder whether he is a wolf too. Asks his mother how to find his wolf skin. Say she tells him only his mother can show him how to discover his skin, and only when she's a wolf. The boy cries. Say you laugh for the third time. Ha ha ha. Say the father sends the man-child over to the preacher's house. Takes a fresh buckskin and a basket of buns. Man-child smells his mother there, but mother is at home. Man-child sniffs, follows his nose. Follows his wolf nose to the wolf skin thrown on the seat of the preacher man's wooden bench. Say he goes home and says to his mother, Mama, Mama, I know where your skin is. Say the wolf woman has lost her skin, but still has a wolf's bones. Say the wolf woman has lost her skin, but still has a wolf's heart. Say the wolf woman has lost her skin, but still has a wolf's eyes. Say the wolf woman creeps out in the dark while her husband is away hunting and steals through the window of the preacher's house. Skin on me, she says, and on the skin comes. The skin reaches for her, clamps around her, tightens, caresses her like a lover, and she shudders. Skin flows all over her, down her back, around her thighs. Skin wraps itself softly around her throat, loosens her hurt heart. Say the hunter comes home to find his wife gone and a wolf sitting in the kitchen. The cub is alongside. Say the wolf growls and bares its teeth. Say you never see it coming. Say the wolf gets the last laugh. Ha ha ha.
It's so good. It's wonderful to hear in your voice. Oh, I remember reading that and that laugh.
I had great fun writing that one, I have to say. It just felt like every story where the woman takes the abuse, and just like walks away from it. It's just like, no, just one story where the hunter gets ate. Yeah. That's all I wanted.
That's wonderful. I would like to ask one more question, and this is truly for me personally, but I know when we have worked with scheduling the interview, and you're very committed to your writing practice, which I admire the hell out of. And I would love to hear about how you write. I know you said it's early in the morning for you, but what's your relationship with writing and following your calling through writing, and how do you do that?
Gosh, it's an ongoing thing. I don't function really very well after midday. I'm a real early morning person. I can't do anything. This is about as coherent as I ever get at this time of day, and then it's all gone. So I can only really create in the mornings, and I love the early mornings. I love that pre-dawn time before everybody is up, and so I can only really write if I really want to do creative work as opposed to research. I can only really write, probably my best time would be about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So when I'm writing a book, that's what I do. And that, because I know that is a time where I'm still in my own dream time. I'm still in the dream time of the world. I've had a cup of tea, I've fed the dogs, they're snoozing, and I can just go for it before anybody else is bothering me. I really find that time precious, because if if it got to midday and then I wanted to start to write, I just wouldn't have anything. I wouldn't be able to. Literally, it just does not work like that for me. Writing comes out of a kind of I'm half in the world and half in the imaginal world, and you can't just switch that on and off at will, or at least I can't do. So when I am writing a book, once I have gotten into the flow of it, and I'm like any writer, getting into a new book is intensely difficult. It's just excruciatingly hard. I will do anything to avoid it until I'm in it, and then terrific. I have to go with that flow. Otherwise, I wouldn't finish the book. And I'm fortunate enough now, several books in, to have a very committed and very wonderful publisher that I love dearly, and I am contracted. So my books are contracted, and the idea of breaking a deadline is a terrible thing to me, and so I feel an obligation to deliver, and so I have to really put that first. But it's a struggle, to say okay, I'm not going to answer emails until midday or whatever. I fight with that constantly, and being a busy person who, very few writers make money from books. I've been very fortunate, because If Women Are As Rooted particularly has sold extremely well, but it's really my online courses and my programs that pay the bills. So you're constantly juggling the need to write, the calling to write, the muse, or whatever you want to call it, banging on your door with the need to pay the bills. So I don't want to give the impression that it's an easy thing to do, but I try to be very disciplined about it once I am in that space of writing the book. Otherwise, nothing would ever get done.
It's helpful to hear about. Thanks for sharing. What's the new book you're working on?
Yeah, I'm working on a book which is about the myths and stories of elderhood in women. And I'm about to be 59. I don't find in the world around me very many, in the world around me where I grew up, I don't mean necessarily in the wider world, many good visions of what it is to be an elder woman. I think elder women particularly are trivialized, are often made fun of, are just not taken seriously. Now, we can all think of inspiring examples who are other than that, but for most people, there isn't much really to look to in contemporary culture and say, I can be that. And again, if we look back to our old myths and stories, there are some very wonderful elder women in our myths and in our fairy tales in Europe and throughout this part of the world. And so it's really a question of going back to those archetypal characters, those archetypal old women, and saying, okay, what did they have to offer? What were they? What were they necessary for? What was their particular gift? And I think, again, to me, part of, a little bit like the wolf story, part of reclaiming that sense of agency, of necessity, of being something as an old woman, is just not taking any crap anymore, and just not allowing them to write us out of history. And so the book is called Haggitude. And it is a word that literally one night, I don't know what I was dreaming. I wish I could remember what it was dreaming, because I bet it'd be good. I woke up in the middle of the night and I said Haggitude. Then I went back to sleep, and in the morning I woke up and I thought, boy, that would be a good title for a book. And so it is.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. Before we end, would you like to say anything about your online offerings and how listeners who might be interested in following the thread into the rich world of your work, besides your books, might have a way to work with you?
Sure. I do some in-person retreats in America and in Ireland and the UK, but really, and particularly the older I get, the harder it is to do that and to be away from home and to be away from the writing. And I find that very dislocating. And so most of the ways that people work with me on cultivating the mythic imagination on all of the issues that we've talked about today is through some kind of online offerings. And I guess the one, I have various online courses, self-study or interactive, where I do webinars and have forums, but I'm particularly excited about a new membership program that I've just launched called This Mythic Life, which runs from month to month. So, you can join at any time and leave at any time. And it is all about exercising the mythic imagination, cultivating the mythic imagination. 1 month we might look at the archetype of the wild woman and what that means in our lives. Another month we'll be looking at kind of archetypal astrology and how we fit into the bigger patterns in the cosmos. We'll be looking at the ancestral arts, as I call them. All kinds of different ways of training ourselves, of exercising the mythic muscle, as I think of it, of training ourselves to look for those underlying patterns beyond the obvious in the world. So I think that's probably the most flexible of my offerings. And as I say, only started in January. We're having some wonderful conversations on our private forum. None of it's associated with Facebook or any of those other platforms. And yeah, I'm really excited about that work going forward.
Wonderful. I love your work, and I just want to say thank you for following your calling and sharing so generously.
Thank you, Erin, and you too. I love what you do as well, and it's been lovely to talk to you. Really, really thoughtful questions. Thank you for that.
Thanks so much for the time, and can't wait for your new book too.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.